The 2012 deception, what it is and why it's important. A brief overview. It is the theory that the world will either see cataclysms or transformation for the good, that is, enlightenment, or both on December 21st, 2012, or leading up to that date. It is validated by the Mayan calendar, which supposedly resets itself on that date. It is no longer a fringe theory, although it has been widely searched for the past 10 years. In the last 2 years, it has increased its search volume by tenfold, and this is largely to do with the release of 2012, the movie by Sony Pictures. They actually pushed back the release date of their film a year, and then circulated trailers that said things like "Find out the truth, Google search 2012." And 2012 theories have been around for about 10 years, and there are a lot of them. So people have been doing just as the trailer implored them to do, and Google searched it and found any number of theories about what's supposedly going to happen in 2012. And so average people are currently very concerned. You might find people in your workplace that are not normally prone to looking into odd things that know and are concerned about 2012. And that's a lot to do with this recent push by Sony. Alright, let's look at the Mayan calendar, as many of the theories springboard from this particular idea. The Maya used two main calendars, the sacred year of 260 days, called the Tzolk'in, and the civil calendar of 365 days, called the Hab. To reference the passage of time for more than 52 years, the Maya used a third calendar called the Long Count. The Long Count calendar served the same purpose in the Mayan culture as the numbered years serves in ours. That is to say that when we reference a year in the past or in the future, let's say Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, in order for the Mayans to do that, they had to come out with a long count calendar, because their other calendars were, every individual day had its own designation on the calendar. So therefore, if they wanted to have a history lesson or talk about something in the future, they required another calendar, and that's where we get the long count calendar from. This is also why they set the beginning of the calendar before their civilization in the distant past, so that they could reference things that happened in the past. It's also important to note that the calendar reset itself like our calendars do actually as well. The most widely accepted correlations of the end of the long count calendar are Mayan date 13.0000, with the Western calendar that correlates to about December 21st or December 23rd, 2012. And those debates are out there, but for our purposes we will just concede that it's on December 21st, although I haven't personally looked into much in those debates. There's a lot of idea that the Mayan calendar was extremely accurate, but the Mayan calendar was not as accurate as the modern Gregorian calendar, certainly. It's not even as accurate as the older Julian calendar. This is especially true in regards to how we compensate for leap years and seasons, and it wasn't really that helpful in knowing when or to plant the crops and those kinds of things. They had to relegate that to the priesthood because the calendar's failings. The fact that the long count calendar reaches a round number is an inevitable consequence of counting the number of days since a given starting point. And you can reference that at 2012 Hoax, and they are a great website and a great resource. Now this is where the truth ends. The fact that the Mayan calendar ends on December 21st, 2012 is the only thing that is true in all of this. Well, there might be some more things here and there, but we'll discuss them as we go. But basically, from here on out, what we will see is the many attempts to attach significance to this single fact, that is, that the Mayan calendar apparently ends on December 21st, 2012. Now we'll look briefly at the history of people attaching significance to this event and thereby creating the 2012 phenomena. The history is a little bit muddy, but from what I can gather, it started in some measure in 1987 with Jose Arguelles. He was one of the first people that connected the end of the calendar to an earth-changing event of some type. He believes in an enlightenment version of this earth-changing event, that is, that the people will go through some sort of spiritual evolution, and most of the early proponents had this view of 2012. He is not a scientist. He is not a Mayanist scholar. To give you an idea of where he stands on some of this and his views about enlightenment in 2012, I'll read a few quotes. He says, by 2012, according to the law of time, we must be ready for the shift, the unparalleled transition into the next stage of our evolution, the noosphere. This signifies the attainment of a unified field of planetary consciousness. Another quote, to change human consciousness, one preliminary step is to change the human macro program, the calendar. The most practical application of the law of time is the 13-moon, 28-day calendar. With this elegant tool, the law of time lays the foundation for the reformulation of the human mind, the coming of the noosphere. But this is only the beginning of the adventure in time. Other early proponents are David Wilcock. The picture to your left is a picture of David Wilcock on the right, actually. That's Edgar Cayce on the left. David Wilcock believes himself to be the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce and has taken a lot of photos with himself in particular poses that are similar to Edgar Cayce's, as well as his friends and family, which he believes are also reincarnations of Edgar Cayce's friends and family. David Wilcock had an early website called ascension2000.com, and he is a proponent of the enlightenment or spiritual evolution version of the theory. It's interesting, it was proposed to, this enlightenment was supposed to happen in 2000, specifically May 5th, 2000. And then, of course, when that showed no signs of happening, it was right around then that all the 2012 theories began in earnest. And you'll find that to be the case with almost everybody that is preaching 2012. It's very, very rare to find anybody that's talking about 2012 before 2000. Now, David Wilcock is a psychic and a channeler for spirits. He received his information from two spiritual entities he calls Ra and Seth, and there are others that he receives these from. This is a screenshot of the Wayback Machine Internet Archive for Ascension 2000. It was around on the 2000, around November 10th, 2000, that it was decided as the first mention of 2012. And then, of course, 2012 really took off from that point. So from about 2000 on, it became something that everybody started chiming in on in their different websites, and we'll look at sort of how that began a little later on, because I find that to be probably one of the most fascinating aspects of all this. So now let's look at some of the specific theories about what will happen in 2012. No two theories are alike, is what I usually say, but you can find this when you ask somebody about what they think is going to happen in 2012, and you ask another person, and very often their views are dramatically different, even those that might hold the same sort of view about enlightenment or cataclysms. Even their views about what's supposed to happen and why are very, very different for the most part. Let's just run down the list of some of the most popular ones, and we'll discuss them in detail a little later. The first is astrological galactic alignment, which is caused by the 26,000-year precession cycle. That is the precession of the equinoxes, which we'll look at in a second. And they say this will cause calamity or an evolution of consciousness. The other more popular one is astronomical galactic alignment, which is the lining up of the actual solar system with the physical plane of galactic center, and they say this will cause calamity and or enlightenment. Another very popular one is a pole shift, but even then people tend to disagree on whether it's a magnetic or a physical pole shift or both. And then a very popular one is Nibiru or Planet X or an asteroid collision or a near miss of either or all of those. Solar flares are a lot more popular now, with the movie making that a popular one. And they say this will cause the poles to shift or to cause Earth crust displacement, as we'll look at too in just a moment. Now, they also say that there's going to be an alignment of the planets, and this is an actual alignment or just a conjunction. We'll look at that here in just a second. Or a passing through a nebula will change vibrational frequencies and cause enlightenment or a spiritual evolution. So that's a breakdown of some of the most popular beliefs about what's supposed to happen in 2012, and now we're going to take a look at the specifics. The first I'll mention is astrological galactic alignment. This is a very important one because many 2012 theories springboard from this event. Actually, they start at the Mayan calendar and then they say, and the Mayans knew about this event. And this is where they say, because the Mayans knew about this event, that many other things are going to happen. They say this will cause either cataclysms or a spiritual enlightenment. Now this happens because of the 26,000-year precession cycle, and it's actually not on December 21st, is really an arbitrary date. Probably the leading proponent about the Mayans saying that this event was significant is John Major Jenkins, and on a section of his website where he responds to critics, he says this. It says, in the interest of clarity, I will mention that it would be more accurate to say that the alignment occurs in the era of AD 2012. Because precession is such a slow phenomena, 50 years on either side of 2012 might be more appropriate. But it's basically the Earth changing its tilt, which make the stars in view a little bit different. So it looks, from the Earth's perspective only, it wouldn't look like this from the moon or anywhere else, that the Earth is in line with the sun and galactic center. So therefore, we're not actually in line with the galaxy, except from the Earth's perspective. So nothing physical will happen as a result of this because it's just an illusion and only from the Earth's perspective. A good way to look at that is to imagine how a gyroscope spins and to think that the Earth is doing basically that, and that it takes about 26,000 years for the Earth to complete that cycle. So to say that the Earth is going to be somewhere in the galaxy every 26,000 years really is to not understand the very basics of what that cycle is about. This spin of the Earth can do nothing to tell where the Earth is going to be in relation to galactic center. So even if we were to assume that something significant would happen if the Earth actually lined up with the center of the galaxy, this 26,000-year cycle could never tell us what or when that was supposed to happen. The best it could do is tell us what the stars would look like from the Earth's perspective on a particular day. In understanding those concepts, you will also be able to administer my 2012 quack test, which is really easy. All you have to do is listen for a 2012 speaker or teacher mention the words 26,000 years. And if they say that the Earth will enter into so-and-so nebula, or that it will a great gravitational pull will happen, or that some radiation will occur, or that a solar flare will happen because of something that happens in a 26,000-year cycle, then you will know that they are a quack, or at the very least have not done that thorough of research, because the Earth is not actually lining up with the galactic plane. It will only look like that, and only because of the Earth's very odd wobble. Okay, in relation to this particular theory, we're going to look at John Major Jenkins for a few reasons. One is that John Major Jenkins is something of the biggest voice in this particular area, and he's often used to go on the History Channel or Discovery Channel shows and those kinds of things to tell people that this is going to happen. Now, he has an interesting theory about why he thinks that the Mayans were pointing to this 26,000-year event, and why this event is supposedly talking about a coming enlightenment. None of which that the Mayans actually said outright. So John Major Jenkins in his work attempts to prove 2 points. One, that the Mayans knew of this precession event that we just discussed, and two, that they thought that that precession event had something to do with a new rebirth or enlightenment. He says that the Mayans made their calendar end because they knew change was coming, and instead of simply writing anything to that effect down, they told us in the symbolism of a game they played. Jenkins and the Mayan ball game. On the left, you're going to see a diagram of a Mayan football court, an ancient Mayan football court, that Jenkins says is the key to recognizing that the Mayans were pointing with their calendar to the galactic alignment event that we just looked at. He says that on December 21st, 2012, the sun will rise above the horizon, lining up perfectly with certain artifacts that are associated with this ball game. In what is marked E over there is what you see to the right, which is a stone that's been faded, but apparently we can tell that on the bottom there is a dead god and that there is another god that is rising, according to Jenkins, which essentially means that the death of one age and the beginning of a new age, according to Jenkins. But again, the Mayans don't spell this out anywhere else in their writings. This has to be apparently interpreted through the use of this particular event. Jenkins further explains in an attempt to associate this Mayan ball game with the galactic alignment event that we just looked at. He shows us that the location of the ball court was strategically placed to be next to what he says looks like the Milky Way, which was a forest, or perhaps it was a mountain range, but he says this was the representative of the Milky Way, and that its connection in its location to the Mayan ball game was significant. Jenkins also attributes astronomical information to many of the Mayan glyphs in order to extract a confession from the Mayans that they were in fact talking about a galactic alignment with the end of their calendar. A few criticisms of John Major Jenkins. The first is that the alignment of the ball court isn't even accurate, and this is pretty important considering it's basically the core of his theory. He explains this by saying it is a visual preference to the perceived horizon location as the sky begins to lighten, rather than where the sun breaks free, or perhaps by the likelihood that the solstice rituals began many days before the solstice. Other criticisms of John Major Jenkins are in regards to his use of Mayan artwork and then attributing astronomical data that fits in with his theory to that artwork. They say that the Popol Vuh does not contain astronomy, or that there's no logical reason to assume that the stelas must be interpreted in an astronomical way. For instance, to the right we see a scene from the Popol Vuh where the Hero twins are hunting a perched bird with blowguns, and there's no reason to assume that this must be either from the context of the story or any other surrounding information that it is supposed to be interpreted in an astronomical way. And given the way that Jenkins interprets it, it seems to necessitate some reasoning behind it, other than the fact that it seems like he's trying to prove his theory. At the end of the day, even if this theory was correct, it would be insignificant, because if the Mayans knew about precession, which wouldn't be that great of an accomplishment as it was calculated in Europe 100 years before the first Mayan calendar, and as a matter of basic math and astronomical observation, it would only be a visual phenomena, and only from the Earth's perspective, and could have no effect on Earth changes or consciousness. If they gave other significance to the precession cycle, such as it being about rebirth, you would think that they would make more of a point about it, other than an esoteric ball court. But even if they did view it as a symbol of rebirth, it would be their prerogative, either for timekeeping or for religious reasons. But it is my view that they did not have this in mind when ending their calendar. The next theory that we'll tackle is probably the more significant one. It's the astronomical galactic alignment theory. This is the idea that our solar system is moving around the center of the galaxy every 225 million years or so, and while doing so, it is moving up and down in a cycle crossing the plane every 33 million years. The theory is that in 2012, the solar system will cross the galactic plane and cause any number of cataclysms. It's important to note, I think, that of all the people that suggest this version of galactic alignment have never, to the best of my knowledge, provided any kind of scientific study or any kind of proof that they know where the solar system is in relation to the galactic plane, because apparently it's a pretty difficult thing to find out. But I have found these 3 studies from very respected journals that basically all suggest that we crossed the galactic plane about 3 million years ago, and that we won't be due back for another 30 million years or so. And we could hypothesize whether or not crossing the galactic plane would be a significant event or not. I don't think there's evidence to suggest it would be, but it's pretty much moot since we won't be back for another 30 million years. The next popular theory about 2012 is the pole shifts. And although many theorists disagree on whether this pole shift will be a magnetic one or a physical shifting of the crust of the Earth, the reason for either one happening in or around 2012 is usually cited as one of the following reasons. They say a pole shift will happen because of planetary alignment, or that one will happen because of Planet X or Nibiru and its comet's tail, a tremendous sun flare, or an asteroid. So in order to debunk a pole shift, we must first debunk the causes for a pole shift. The first is planetary alignment, but this is pretty easy to debunk as there is no planetary alignment in 2012. This is what the planets will look like on December 21st, 2012, and you can verify this with a free astronomy program online, one like Skyview Cafe. I've actually seen people try to say that this is going to be a significant alignment, and they try to show how it sort of looks like a pentagram if you connect the dots. But to be sure, they're not in line as the movie 2012 presents. There's another kind of planetary alignment called conjunctions, and that's a term that is used in positional astronomy and astrology. It means that, as seen from some place, in this case the Earth, two celestial bodies appear near one another in the sky. And this happens every year, not just on 2012, but it would be the same here in 2008 on December 21st, where Mars is in line with the Sun, which is in line with Mercury. Of course, they're not actually in line. They're nowhere near in line if you're viewing it from the solar system's perspective. And because the planets only appear to be in line and are not actually in line, there would be no logical reason to expect any additional gravitational pull or anything else. So to say that a pole shift is going to be caused by this conjunction, which happens every year, it would just be wrong. Another explanation of why we should expect a pole shift has a lot to do with Planet X or Nibiru, which is the idea that there's an extra planet in our solar system that just has an extremely elliptical orbit of 3,600 years or so that's proposed by Zecharia Sitchin, and that they say that when this planet comes around every 3,600 years, it causes all kinds of trouble. The idea of Nibiru is traced back to Zecharia Sitchin and his translations of the Sumerian texts, and specifically to his interpretation of the VA-243 cylinder seal, which he says shows that the Sumerians knew of 12 planets, minus the sun and the moon, which they considered to be planets, and as such, this would mean that there is another planet. Sitchin's interpretation of the seal is wrong. The Sumerians have an unambiguous symbol for the sun, a circle with 4 triangles around it like rays, and squiggly lines between the triangles, which is definitely not the symbol in the seal. The symbol used in the seal is that of a bright star. This symbol for stars is very commonly used, and this is the symbol we have in the seal. So even Sitchin's basic premise is wrong. For details on this and what the seal actually means, see Dr. Michael Heiser's paper, The Myth of the 12th Planet, a brief analysis of cylinder seal VA-243, which is available at his website sitchiniswrong.com. Sitchin claims that the picture shows Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which are only visible with telescopes. But since the Sumerians didn't have telescopes, they could therefore only have known of those planets, as Sitchin hypothesizes aliens told them of their existence. But the Sumerians thought that the moon and the sun were planets, which they aren't. Certainly aliens would know that the sun and the moon are not planets. Sitchin is picking and choosing things in this picture to support his arguments, and ignoring things that don't support it, like the inscription itself, which has nothing to do with this theory. But for a much more detailed expose of the many problems in Sitchin's translations, go to the site sitchiniswrong.com. The bottom line about Planet X is that if it is true, we should be totally unable to miss it. For Planet X to be here in less than a decade, it can't be any farther than 1 billion or so kilometers away, and even at that distance, it would be one of the brightest objects in the sky, even if it were too faint to be seen with the naked eye. Remember, Pluto is 5 billion kilometers out, and although tiny, can be easily detected using modern equipment. Pluto is significantly smaller than Planet X is supposed to be. Some will claim that it is because it is hiding behind the sun, and that's why we can't detect it. But if it was behind the sun, it would be moving at its fastest point considering its projected orbit, and would be only behind the sun for a very short time. The next proposed cause of a pole shift is a massive solar flare. This is sort of a lesser-known theory that was popularized by the Sony film 2012, of which this theory played a prominent role. They also tied it to Hapgood's theory of Earth crust displacement, which we will look at later, even though Hapgood's theory of Earth crust displacement originally had nothing to do with solar flares. There are solar flares all of the time. The number of flares and sunspots varies over time in an approximate 11-year cycle. But there is no reason to anticipate a particularly bad cycle. It's sort of like hurricane season. You know that they will come every season, but there's no way to tell if one season will be worse than the next. The Sun was due to reach a maximum, called solar max, in its 11-year cycle in 2011 or 2012. However, more recent observations have pushed this date off to sometime in 2013. But even if we're going to be in solar maximum in 2012, it wouldn't be any different than what happens every 11 years. Okay, we're back to pole shifts. After looking at all the reasons that they said the pole shifts were going to happen, let's look at the pole shift phenomena just by itself. There are actual pole shifts that do occur, both magnetic pole shifts and physical pole shifts. We are, in fact, in the middle of a long process of a magnetic pole shift right now. And you can see here in this diagram the shift of the magnetic pole, which is a well understood phenomena. This article from NASA states, reversals take a few thousand years to complete, and during that time, contrary to popular belief, the magnetic field does not vanish. It just gets more complicated, says Glatzmeyer. Magnetic lines of force near the Earth's surface become twisted and tangled, and magnetic poles pop up in unaccustomed places. A south magnetic pole might emerge over Africa, for instance, or a north pole over Tahiti. Weird, but it's still a planetary magnetic field, and it still protects us from space radiation and solar storms. In other words, if reversals take a few thousand years to complete, then this means that if you say we're going to have a magnetic reversal event on December 21st, 2012, it shows a profound misunderstanding of the concept. You'd have to explain some reason why the magnetic reversal process would be sped up. And people are just simply taking a known phenomena, which is a pole reversal that takes several thousand years to complete, and just making it sound spooky while erroneously slapping 2012 on top of it. Now moving on to a physical pole shift. They say the actual crust of the Earth will shift because of one of the various reasons we've already mentioned: galactic alignment, planet X, or solar flares. Let's first set the record straight that this would require an event of tremendous energy, and that it is not a part of any cycle or natural occurrence, and no mere increase of solar energy would be enough to cause this as proposed by Sony, which we will look at in just a second. We have actually had a few degree shift of the poles in the past, but not a reversal by any means. It's what's called a true polar wanderer. William Sager, in an article titled Texas A&M Oceanographer Challenges Plate Tectonics as a Reason for the Pole's Shift, says that our data set indicates that this polar shift took place at a rate of between 5 and 10 degrees per million years. He said, essentially, it happens within the blink of an eye in terms of geological time. So, if he says this polar shift took place at a rate between 5 and 10 degrees per million years, essentially it happened within the blink of an eye in terms of geological time, this means that scientists think that moving 5 to 10 degrees in a million years is considered in the blink of an eye. To say that this is expected to happen in one day, December 21st, 2012, is totally wrong. Not to mention that those that do try to offer reasons for the shift are using some variation of the galactic alignment or planet X or solar flares to explain why this should happen. A logical place to go from here is to discuss Hapgood's theory of Earth crust displacement, mainly because it was used prominently in the film 2012 with a combination of solar flares and galactic alignment. Charles Hapgood, who is not a geologist, hypothesized that since some old maps had shown Antarctica, even though it hadn't been discovered yet, and because it was not in its current position at the South Pole, but instead about 30 degrees further north in a temperate climate, he hypothesized that this meant that the Earth's crust had shifted, rather than chalking it up to bad maps. It had nothing to do with solar flares. It should be noted also that what is used in the movie is more Graham Hancock's version than it is Charles Hapgood's. In fact, even the neutrinos that were used by Woody Harrelson in the movie and the whole idea of the orange peel analogy was taken straight from Graham Hancock. The theory itself is not well thought out. It fails to answer numerous geological questions, like why Antarctica shows evidence of being covered in ice for the last 300,000 years. Even proposing the theory is a logical leap of faith. Moving from old world maps to a theory that Antarctica was located 30 degrees further north about 12,000 years ago has no logical basis. But if you're interested, you can go find a detailed analysis of this theory at my site, the2012deception.net. Now moving on from pole shifts, we're finally on the last popular theory about what's going to happen in 2012. This one I've called enlightenment. It's the view that instead of an end of the world scenario in 2012, it's the theory that it will be a physical and or consciousness transformation or a new beginning. It's sometimes called transformationalism. This view is the earliest view. Most of the people who were there from the beginning held this view of a 2012 Enlightenment view. In my opinion, it's the most dangerous, and I'll explain why in just a little bit. It also has the least evidence to support it, and that's saying something after we've looked at all the other views. It has this reverse psychology aspect, and we'll see it presented in this way a lot of times. People will say, well, all these stupid people, they think 2012 has to do with the end of the world, but we really smart people, we know that it's really just about enlightenment. So just about everybody that holds that view has that kind of attitude about it as well. It almost totally started by people speaking with spirits, that is, people that were channeling entities that maybe they thought they were channeling aliens or Pleiadians or Greys or spirits or whatever, but almost without exception, you have people that hold this view, that they got this view directly from the, quote, spirit world. And in my view, it's the biggest reason that this entire deception about 2012 is happening. That is, to implant this particular idea about 2012 into our minds, one that we are entering a new beginning of enlightenment. And I believe even those people that currently think that 2012 is about a destruction sort of event, they eventually will move into the camp of enlightenment as time goes on. Here are a few enlightenment buzzwords. These are things that people say when they're referring to this enlightenment that's supposed to happen in 2012. They'll call it a consciousness shift or a spiritual evolution, ascension, vibrational acceleration or a vibrational shift. These are all phrases people use when they're referring to the transformationalist position in regards to 2012. So what are the causes of this enlightenment in 2012? Surely something's going to happen to cause everyone to be enlightened. But this theory has been repeated so many times since the beginning that hardly anyone ever tries to explain any scientific or even spiritual reason to expect this event around 2012. They usually go on about how vibrations and light beams and how the world is suffering and we need to change, but almost never offer a reason why it applies to 2012 and why we should expect it or even how it will happen. Nevertheless, many people believe it as a fact. There are a few people that offer reasons or catalysts of why this is supposed to happen. The two main ones are that an alignment with the center of the galaxy will open up a channel for cosmic energy that will cleanse the Earth. So they are oftentimes referring to the 26,000 year galactic alignment, but as we looked at both of those galactic alignments, it's very obvious that none of those events, or at least the 26,000 year event, can't be a cause for any particular enlightenment. And the other one isn't going to happen for another 30 million years at best, so there's no reason to expect that one in 2012. The other reason that they give of why we're going to have a spiritual enlightenment is that the Earth will pass through a photon belt. A photon ring or a Manzanic ring, photon band, or golden nebula. These are the terms associated with this particular version of why we're going to all be enlightened in 2012. The photon belt has been a hot topic in New Age circles since 1991, when a story about it appeared in Australia's Nexus magazine. In 1994, it received a book-length treatment in You Are Becoming a Galactic Human by Virginia Essene and Sheldon Niddle. Asina and Niddle claim to be channeling members of the Syrian Council, beings from a distant planet. Barbara Hand Clow received similar information about the Earth being transformed by photons from a belt near Alcyon in her book The Pleiadian Agenda in 1991, but instead from Pleiadians, not Syrians. Problems with the photon belt theory. The Earth isn't heading towards the Pleiades, but away from them. In the 1850s, it was conjectured that the Earth orbited the Pleiades, but this has long since been discredited. The Pleiades are some 440 light-years away. The core of the Pleiades cluster is approximately 8 light-years across, so even if we were moving towards it, we certainly wouldn't be there in 2012. There's no anomaly near the Pleiades star cluster. The Pleiades are surrounded by a nebula, or a gas cloud, and this cloud is composed not of photons, but of dust and hydrogen gas. More problems with the photon belt theory. In 1999, Paul LaViolette, chairman of the Starburst Foundation, a scientific research institute, criticized assertions about the photon belt made by Shirley Kemp in a magazine published by the Australian International UFO Research Society, later reprinted in the February-March 1991 issue of Nexus. He disputed Kemp's assertion that the belt had been detected by satellites in 1961, holding that no records of such satellite findings were ever released, and that it was unlikely that equipment of the period would have been able to detect a belt such as was being described. LaViolette also disputed Kemp's assertions about the movements of the belt, and that the solar system in relation to the star Alcyon in the Pleiades cluster, saying that in order for Kemp's figures to be accurate, the solar system would have to be traveling at 10% of the speed of light, while Alcyon itself would have to be approximately 1 billion times the mass of the Sun in order to support such an orbit. The 2012 Deception Part 2. Who benefits? The easy answer to the question of who benefits is that people make money. There's lots of books and DVDs. There's Hollywood movies to make. The last 10 years have just shown that anyone can put out a book and put the words 2012 on it and it'll be a bestseller. But consider this. People, especially at the beginning of all this, were diligently spreading the same message about 2012 enlightenment because they claimed to have been told to do so by spiritual entities. This would usually take the form of channeling or psychic readings, even though the person often is told that they are being possessed or spoken to by aliens, but not always. They trust these spiritual sources as authoritative. They then feel that it is their mission to tell the world about 2012 enlightenment. Here is a random example among hundreds that are out there on the internet. So, you may be wondering then, why am I creating a 2012 blog? I was asked during an alien channeling in Botanian Canyon, Sedona, Arizona, late in the night, then nudged during meditations back home in Oakland, California, then told with loud clarity while driving through an amazingly strong vortex by the Trinity River, and now, since I didn't take the other 3 blatant hints, I am being pushed to do so now. All right already, I'm doing it, and, actually, I'm happy and excited about doing it, because it just feels like the timing is perfect. Also, I have noticed so many people getting worked up about gloom and doom with 2012. I feel it is part of my mission to raise awareness. 2012 is certainly not a catastrophic event, rather a beautiful, highly enlightening shift to a high vibrational acceleration into a very high dimension. It is ascension at its all-time best. There's nothing new about people getting information from the spirit world, according to them, and then being forced in some measure to give it to other people. The entire New Age movement was dictated in this way. If you look at Helena Blavatsky and Alice Bailey, members of the Theosophical Society, which in large measure was the birth of the New Age movement, they claimed to get their information from ascended masters, which according to them were formerly humans but had ascended into a higher dimension, so they were no longer physical, and they would come back to teach people different things, sometimes called the Great White Brotherhood. David Icke also claims to have received his early information from, quote, extra-dimensional beings who asked him to write books about these subjects. Jordan Maxwell was in contact with Pleiadians, according to parts of his testimony. Most, if not all, of the 2012 originators, including David Wilcock, who channeled what's known as Ra or Seth, Barbara Hand Clow, Pleiadians, and Virginia Essene and Sheldon Niddle, as we discussed with the Syrians. So am I suggesting that these things are real? I think that these people are having real encounters, but that the aliens or angels are deceiving them, not just about the 2012 information, the science, etc., which we have seen to be false, but also about their true identities and motives. These people are forced to disseminate this information because, in my opinion, getting this idea to as many people as possible is a big part of a spiritual agenda that I will now attempt to explain. But first, I will propose what they really are. Ephesians 6 verse 12 in the Bible says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." 1 Timothy 4:1 says, "Now the Spirit speaketh expressly, that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils." And 2 Corinthians 11 says, "And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing for his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works." Here are some biblical facts about Satan and his angels. They can talk. They walk to and fro in the earth and seek rest. They seek and accept worship. They have intelligence. They know the time is short. They recognize who the saved are. They testify to the divinity of Jesus Christ. They believe there is one God. They are aware of their destiny. They influence men to lie. They have great strength to overpower man. And they have been seen by men and are frightening to behold. So you're probably wondering, why in the world would demons care about 2012 enlightenment? Here are some quotes associated with the supposed coming enlightenment, and maybe they will help explain why demons would benefit from this idea. This one is from Michael Tsarian. He says, "And that the end date of 2012 signals major changes positively for consciousness." Again, as I repeat, before you can have the light, or when you have a bright light, the first thing you notice is the dirt. The survivors are those who can adjust their consciousnesses and mentality to the nonviolent movement of nature and synchronize their psyches with the universal meta-theme, having the fates conspire to augur in cataclysmic external and internal events in order to undermine the rotten edifice that we stand worshipping and bring it crashing down around us. As the photonic light gradually intensifies, most people's consciousnesses are going to rebel, as we all do when a bright light is shined in our face. We turn away and cover our eyes. We may even strike out at those holding the light towards us. Those few who can face this light and who are prepared for it will be guided, given their healing, and able to live their dreams. But these few will have to be deeply able to understand what's happening to those around them in order to be defended against the worst effects of this, the regular but radical change. David Icke, a person who also thinks that the 26,000-year cycle will somehow pass us through a light nebula, says, "Then we can go into stage 2, which is the incredible consciousness shift which is going to happen, and is happening for many people already. But it can happen for everybody if we open up to the knowledge of what's going on, and to do that, the edifice of oppression must go. And the second is not going to happen for many people unless we remove the edifice of suppression. Because most people are going to think, what the heck is going on? And they're going to go through this great change in a complete fog of what's happening. Fear. Oh my goodness, what's happening? Two things to do here. One is to start focusing on how the world is controlled, identifying it, removing it, and secondly, that we can concentrate on the transformation spiritually that is unfolding unto the year 2012 and beyond. I got this from a random channeling session that I pulled from the internet. It says, "There is an extraordinary divine alchemy also happening with your planet and humanity as it experiences this karmic transmutation. The roots of a new human evolution are taking hold. Through the changes that will occur in your lives and in your world over the next years, a human society of oneness will indeed be birthed. If there is no change, no upheaval, which causes the old ways and systems to be evaluated and dispensed with, then no evolution is possible. If you listen carefully to what's being said there, you realize that they have to get rid of the old system. The old system must become the enemy in order for the new system to be birthed. This is why it's always a big part of the presentations of people like David Icke and Michael Tsarian to marry the idea of the New World Order. When they talk about the New World Order and all the harm that it's doing, they consistently connect it to Christianity. And everyone does this. David Wilcock, his entire presentation on 2012 has more to do with connecting the New World Order to Christianity than it does really about 2012. This is a central concept to 2012 Enlightenment theories. Now they do this usually using the Roman Catholic Church. They show all the pagan things that the Roman Catholic Church does, and they say, look, this is Christianity, and so therefore Christianity is pagan, and it's, got all these connotations too, and they're running the world and all these other things, which may be true and it may be applicable to the Roman Catholic Church, but it certainly has nothing to do with biblical Christianity. But this concept that religions are the enemy, that they are the problem with the world, is a very key component that doesn't necessarily jump out at you right at first with 2012 Enlightenment theories, but it is a very consistent theme, one that is almost never unpresent in these theories. I'm now going to explain a possible scenario, one that I truly think is the reason why this 2012 propaganda has been pushed on us. But before I do, I want to state these two things that I believe, because as I go through this theory, and it's a bit complicated, you may think that I don't believe these two things. But let me just say them. Number one, that I believe that there will be a real Antichrist. And number two, that I believe that there will be a real return of Jesus. But before this, I think there will be a fake Antichrist, as well as a fake Christ, or the real Antichrist. The following is a possible scenario. A major war will be set up by those who have the power to make that kind of thing happen. I think there will be an effort to make this war seem like the same war prophesied at the end of the Bible, to make what comes after that seem like the 1,000 years of peace. There will also be, before that, an effort in the coming years to make a man seem like the biblical Antichrist. They will make it look like he has made a peace agreement with Israel and the whole 9 yards. He will be put in charge of some international government, maybe the UN or the EU, and this system and man will essentially be the fall guy. They will be destroyed by what will appear to be the return of a Christ-like entity, and it will make what comes after that seem like the prophesied utopia. Everything that can be engineered to go wrong will be going wrong in the years leading up to 2012. Wars, famine, pestilence, etc. Then, at a specific time, possibly even December 21st, 2012, but it doesn't have to be, an event will happen that will activate all the years of indoctrination that we have been subject to. The following could happen a number of ways, but many things will be accomplished with it. I have hypothesized in the past that it could be done with a false alien manifestation, where we are saved from ourselves just in the nick of time by them. And I still think it will have something to do with this, i.e. extraterrestrials. One of the reasons is because it would also activate some of our other programming at the same time, namely, that we have been, in the same manner as 2012, i.e. through movies and propaganda, taught to think that aliens' existence equals no God, and so it would help us go into this new system united with a new belief about our origins, as well as a worldwide rejection of God. This new religion will be one where man believes himself to be God, again activating years of latent programming from The Secret, etc. The aliens will encourage this belief by telling us that we just aren't evolved like them, but that we too can be as gods like them. And I will eat my hat if it is not claimed that they genetically created us, because that idea would finally give evolutionists a way to temporarily explain the DNA code, until someone asks, well, who created their DNA? But it will be information overload for family, making national sovereignty obsolete. There is one more ingredient that will be added to the mix. This is the one that you will, if you understand theosophy, know that any utopia can't be complete without, i.e., the world teacher. In addition to the stated objectives, as early as 1889, Blavatsky purportedly had told a group of theosophical students that the real purpose of establishing the society was to prepare humanity for the reception of the world teacher when he appeared again on earth. This was repeated again more publicly by Annie Besant in 1896, 5 years after Blavatsky's death. In Blavatsky's own writings, the only reference to a similar idea indicated that it would not be for at least a century. It is my belief that the world will believe that an ancient avatar or god has returned to save them from themselves. He will possibly claim a relationship of some sort to the ET, but he will most importantly have in some way destroyed the patsy Antichrist and system. This person will activate another program that we have been given by the propaganda machine. This one is part of what's called the externalization of the hierarchy, which is the idea that many ages have seen an avatar come to them at a crucial juncture, and that they were all the same entity. Like Buddha, Krishna, and Jesus, they will say that they are all the Christ consciousness, i.e., the same entity. This will seem to be a genuine God in the flesh, and we will, as a planet, like it a lot. It is my belief that this man will in fact have many of the institutional churches convinced that he is the same Christ as the first century Christ, and that the reason all the pieces don't match up precisely is because the Bible was an error. After all, he did destroy the Antichrist, and he did save us from Armageddon, so he must be the Christ, only a little different than we were expecting. The lukewarm churches will embrace his message totally, as will the rest of the world. And like Hitler after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, he will promise a brighter future than the one that people have just witnessed, one with no more wars, a new world order. I believe that this is what Jesus was talking about when he said in Matthew 24, verse 4, "And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." Every conceivable conspiracy theory has in some way or another been leading up to this event. It has all been preparation for this. This is a spiritual war, and there is a very powerful entity that wants to try to extract the worship from every human on earth. For the first time, he has the infrastructure to control people in such a way to do this. All of the money systems and geopolitics and the police state buildup and chemical poisoning of the planet have all played a role in preparing the world to be spiritually milked by this ancient cherub. But no matter how powerful he is, he and all his demons are still subject to the lowliest Christian, who has been given total power over all dark spirits, because the real Christ has given it to them, even though most do not understand what they have. That is why it is said, "The spirit who lives in you is greater than the spirit who lives in the world." It is important to realize this next part is true in order to understand the reason why the Antichrist will have to convince the world that Christians must be systematically eliminated in the new utopia. The answer to that is found in the following verse. Luke 10, verses 19 and 20. "Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. Notwithstanding, in this rejoice not, that the spirits are subject unto you, but rather rejoice because your names are written in heaven." The Bible also talks about this final world system killing Christians by the untold millions for not worshiping this false Christ. It has always been one of the hardest verses to understand in the Bible for me. How could a world that pretends to be so moral acquiesce to such a brutal genocide? I thought we would have grown out of genocides by now, after seeing so many in the last century. The answer is that it won't be the same world. the next few years will be a roller coaster ride of weirdness, if I'm correct. It is also notable that most of the world's religions can be reconciled to the idea of a guru messiah figure. Take Islam, for example. They believe that Jesus will actually return. They call him Isa. They believe he was a prophet. And they believe that his job will be to return and to chase the Antichrist into the wilderness, but then go to serve as a religious leader to the Imam Mahdi, who will be the political leader. In my opinion, that prophecy is a setup to get the Islamic people to embrace the false prophet and Antichrist team that's spoken of in the Bible. But other religions like Hinduism and Buddhism and the New Age, they can all easily accommodate this idea of a guru Jesus that's not really Jesus, but the same as sort of Krishna and Buddha as well. In fact, it's only Christianity that has been specifically warned about this scenario, and it will serve as yet another reason that they will need to be made the public's #1 enemy. They simply cannot go along with this new utopia, but you can be sure that the world will be told that this resistance to the new utopia is because they are the old system, and that they are holding everyone back from the evolution that the world deserves. Then, if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. The 2012 Deception. What it is, and why it's important. A brief overview. It is the theory that the world will either see cataclysms, or transformation for the good, that is, enlightenment, or both, on December 21st, 2012, or leading up to that date. It is validated by the Mayan calendar, which supposedly resets itself on that date. It is no longer a fringe theory, although it has been widely searched for the past 10 years. In the last 2 years, it has increased its search volume by tenfold. And this is largely to do with the release of 2012, the movie, by Sony Pictures. They actually pushed back the release date of their film a year, and then circulated trailers that said things like, "Find out the truth, Google search 2012. And 2012 theories have been around for about 10 years, and there are a lot of them. So people have been doing just as the trailer implored them to do, and Google searched it and found any number of theories about what's supposedly going to happen in 2012. And so average people are currently very concerned. You might find people in your workplace that are not normally prone to looking into odd things that know and are concerned about 2012. And that's a lot to do with this recent push by Sony. Alright, let's look at the Mayan calendar, as many of the theories springboard from this particular idea. The Maya used two main calendars, the sacred year of 260 days, called the Tzolk'in, and the civil calendar of 365 days, called the Hab. To reference the passage of time for more than 52 years, the Maya used a third calendar called the Long Count. The Long Count calendar, the most practical application of the law of time, is the 13-moon, 28-day calendar. With this elegant tool, the law of time lays the foundation for the reformulation of the human mind, the coming of the noosphere. But this is only the beginning of the adventure in time. Other early proponents are David Wilcock. The picture to your left is a picture of David Wilcock on the right, actually. That's Edgar Cayce on the left. David Wilcock believes himself to be the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce, and has taken a lot of photos with himself in particular poses that are similar to Edgar Cayce's, as well as his friends and family, which he believes are also reincarnations of Edgar Cayce's friends and family. David Wilcock had an early website called Ascension2000.com, and he is a proponent of the Enlightenment or spiritual evolution version of the theory. It's interesting, it was proposed to, this enlightenment was supposed to happen in 2000, specifically May 5th, 2000. And then, of course, when that showed no signs of happening, it was right around then that all the 2012 theories began in earnest. And you'll find that to be the case with almost everybody that is preaching 2012, it's very, very rare to find anybody that's talking about 2012 before 2000. Um, Now, David Wilcock is a psychic and a channeler for spirits. He received his information from two spiritual entities he calls Ra and Seth, and there are others that he receives these from. This is a screenshot of the Wayback Machine Internet Archive for Ascension 2000. It was around on the 2000, around November 10th, 2000, that it was decided as the first mention of 2012. And then, of course, 2012 really took off from that point. So from about 2000 on, it became something that everybody started chiming in on in their different websites, and we'll look at sort of how that began a little later on because I find that to be probably one of the most fascinating aspects of all this. So now let's look at some of the specific theories about what will happen in 2012. No two theories are alike is what I usually say, but you can find this when you ask somebody about what they think is going to happen in 2012, and you ask another person, and very often their views are dramatically different, even those that might hold the same sort of view about enlightenment or cataclysms. Even their views about what's supposed to happen and why are very, very different for the most part. Let's just run down the list of some of the most popular ones, and we'll discuss them in detail a little later. The first is astrological galactic alignment, which is caused by the 26,000-year precession cycle. That is the precession of the equinoxes, which we'll look at in a second. And they say this will cause calamity or an evolution of consciousness. The other more popular one is astronomical galactic alignment, which is the lining up of the actual solar system with the physical plane of galactic center, and they say this will cause calamity and or enlightenment. Another very popular one is a pole shift, but even then people tend to disagree on whether it's a magnetic or a physical pole shift or both. And then a very popular one is Nibiru or Planet X or an asteroid collision or a near miss of either or all of those. Solar flares are a lot more popular now with the movie making that a popular one. The calendar served the same purpose in the Mayan culture as the numbered years serves in ours. That is to say that when we reference a year in the past or in the future, let's say Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, in order for the Mayans to do that, they had to come out with a long count calendar because their other calendars were every individual day had its own designation on the calendar. So therefore, if they wanted to have a history lesson or talk about something in the future, they required another calendar, and that's where we get the long count calendar from. This is also why they set the beginning of the calendar before their civilization in the distant past so that they could reference things that happened in the past. It's also important to note that the calendar reset itself like our calendars do actually as well. The most widely accepted correlations of the end of the long count calendar are Mayan date 13.0000, with the Western calendar that correlates to about December 21st or December 23rd, 2012, and those debates are out there, but for our purposes we will just concede that it's on December 21st, although I haven't personally looked into much in those debates. There's a lot of idea that the Mayan calendar was extremely accurate, but the Mayan calendar was not as accurate as the modern Gregorian calendar, certainly. It's not even as accurate as the older Julian calendar. This is especially true in regards to how we compensate for leap years and seasons, and it wasn't really that helpful in knowing when or to plant the crops and those kinds of things. They had to relegate that to the priesthood because the calendar's failings. The fact that the long count calendar reaches a round number is an inevitable consequence of counting the number of days since a given starting point. And you can reference that at 2012 Hoax, and they are a great website and a great resource. Now this is where the truth ends. The fact that the Mayan calendar ends on December 21st, 2012 is the only thing that is true in all of this. Well, there might be some more things here and there, but we'll discuss them as we go. But basically, from here on out, what we will see is the many attempts to attach significance to this single fact. That is that the Mayan calendar apparently ends on December 21st, 2012. Now we'll look briefly at the history of people attaching significance to this event and thereby creating the 2012 phenomena. The history is a little bit muddy, but from what I can gather, it started in some measure in 1987 with Jose Arguelles. He was one of the first people that connected the end of the calendar to an earth-changing event of some type. He believes in an enlightenment version of this earth-changing event, that is, that the people will go through some sort of spiritual evolution, and most of the early proponents had this view of 2012. He is not a scientist, he is not a Mayanist scholar. To give you an idea of where he stands on some of this and his views about enlightenment in 2012, I'll read a few quotes. He says, "By 2012, according to the law of time, we must be ready for the shift, the unparalleled transition into the next stage of our evolution, the noosphere. This signifies the attainment of a unified field of planetary consciousness." Another quote, "To change human consciousness, one preliminary step is to change the human macro program, the